The Murder Shelf Book Club contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Listener discretion is advised.
It all seemed rather barbaric, like something straight out of a medieval torture chamber, but it was for the greater good. After all, the investigation did not end at the scene. The body itself was riddled with clues that needed to be discovered and could potentially alter the course of an investigation. The tools of the craft alone were enough to haunt even the bravest. The skull key, the brain knife, the rib shears, the tongue tie, the dissection scissors. The images reappeared every time I grabbed that wretched door handle. It was like my own personal horror film that tirelessly looped. From Chasing Down the Zombie Hunter by Troy A. Hillman. Welcome to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast. I am your host, Jill. This is episode 147, The Canal Murders, part 1 on Chasing Down the Zombie Hunter, a new true crime book by Troy A. Hillman. So winter is in full swing, and it has been cold. And the holidays, it is almost Christmas. Hubby and I went to see Trans-Siberian Orchestra recently, and it was a delightful way to kick into the holiday spirit, mind, body, and soul. They are outstanding. What a joy, and I love the electric violin and the flames. So feeling thankful, I also want to thank Maria and Maya for subscribing to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast on YouTube. I see you as you hear me. You guys know your support means everything to me. If you enjoy the podcast, please share it with family and friends, and leave a positive 5-star review, especially on Apple Podcasts, which could really use some love. Additionally, you can join my Patreon for $2 to $4 a month and help choose the next book I feature. And I am teaching my serial killer class. And for each of you who listen, who give me your time and attention, I want to wish you and yours a wonderful holiday season. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and good Kwanzaa, murder bookies. So, Chasing Down the Zombie Hunter. Troy A. Hillman, a retired sergeant for the Phoenix Police Department in Arizona, worked this case. Troy left a thriving career as a certified public accountant, CPA, to join the Phoenix Police Department. Since childhood, he had been fascinated with police shows like Starsky and Hutch, Miami Vice, Hawaii Five-0, and I remember and I loved them too. Eventually, his passion for cold cases and hunting the most elusive serial killers landed him in the Homicide Bureau. He would spend over a decade in law enforcement working with an elite cold case homicide team that solved hundreds of murders dating as far back as the 70s. Now, this is Troy Hillman's first book, and he did a remarkable job. And I like that he gives credit to his partners in the cold case unit, and you feel like you are an insider, getting small insight into what the daily grind is like for investigators delving into these frustrating cold cases. But to kick off our True Crime Book Club, we're going to start with a delicious appetizer that is especially popular in Phoenix and perfect for the holidays: baked brie and cranberry cups. Easy, this festive treat is not only simple to make, but very affordable. So to prepare, you cut the brie cheese into small pieces and you place them into phyllo cups. And you just buy those. They're usually in the freezer section. You add a dollop of cranberry sauce. Whether you prefer jelly or whole berry, that's up to you. Or you just plop in 3 or 4 dried cranberries. You top each cup with a small sprig of thyme and then bake them for 10 to 20 minutes until they are warm and gooey. I promise you, you will not be disappointed. Now, I have paired the baked brie cups with Naked Wine's Dave Harvey Swedish Riesling 2022. I think I've paired this before as well, but it's really a good wine. See, the sweetness of the Riesling beautifully offsets the tartness of the cranberries. And you'll also notice hints of peach, apricot, and candied apple. Now, this delightful combination makes for a refreshing start to our book club podcast. You can find the complete recipe on my blog, along with links to Naked Wines. If you join and become a Naked Wines Angel, the Dave Harvey Swedish Riesling is available for just $11.99, which is a fantastic price for such a quality wine. I'd like to thank Heather Walker for this delicious recipe, and of course, Naked Wines. So check out my blog for the recipe, links to the wine, show notes, sources, a ton of photograph and news articles on this case at www.murdershelfbookclub.com, December 2025. So bon appetit, murder bookies. Let's plunge into chasing down the zombie hunter. When a shift begins at any police department, the day's outcome is always uncertain. This was particularly evident on November 9th, 1992, in Phoenix, when, quote, a gruesome discovery upended the city for the next 30 years, end quote. Joe Krakowicki reported his fiancée, Angela Brosso, missing around midnight. Joe and Angela lived in the Woodstone Apartments, which, for you Arizona locals, is near Interstate 17 and Cactus Road in northern Phoenix. Joe explained to the officers that Angela had gone out for a routine bike ride around dusk. She typically returned after a 45-minute ride, but this time she did not come back. As it got late, Joe and a friend decided to search for her, walking along the bike path, but there was no sign of Angela. The officers listened to Joe and learned that Angela was wearing a gray sweatshirt inside out, purple shorts, a matching shirt, and white sneakers with socks when she left. However, because Angela was an adult, the officers declined to take a missing person report at that time. At 6:30 a.m., Joe again called the police since Angela still hadn't come home, and this time they took a missing persons report. While Joe was being questioned, Angela's mother, Linda, called to wish her a happy birthday, as my heart just sank. So officers began searching the area, and soon after, Officer Robert Walmsley found a body in an open field west of the bike path, and it appeared to be Angela. She was naked except for her shoes and socks, but shockingly, her head was missing. Additionally, she was terribly mutilated, her chest and abdomen cut open, and it appeared that the killer may have tried to sever her in half. Now, this immediately reminded me of the 1947 Black Dahlia case that took place in Hollywood. This victim was Elizabeth Short, whose body was cut in half, but she was not decapitated. Well, now investigators discovered a blood trail on the bike path that led approximately 150 feet, or 46 meters, to a small tree. The victim had been dragged into an open field across from her apartment complex, and then the trail continued up to a steep rim where Angela's body was found. Her clothing had been cut off and discarded nearby. Her Walkman with headphones and her purple Diamondback Topanga bike were missing. Only a bike reflector was found. And a girl after my own heart, it's obvious that Angela loved purple. Angela Brosso was a cheerful and carefree person from Camp Hill in the Harrisonburg area of Pennsylvania. She graduated from Cedar Cliff High School in 1989, and after attending a career day presentation, she decided to enroll in DeVry Institute of Technology, which is near Newark, New Jersey. There for 2 years, she met and began dating Joe Krakowicki. Due to degree requirements, Angela then transferred to the DeVry campus in Los Angeles, where she graduated with honors. And in June 1992, she and Joe reunited in Phoenix and moved into an apartment together and adopted a pet ferret. Now, by that time, Angela has secured a position at Intellect Inc., an electronics company based in Phoenix. Now, in 2015, Linda, Angela's mother, spoke with journalist E.J. Montini from AZ Central. She described her daughter as a shy little girl who grew up in Cumberland County, Pennsylvania. Linda emphasized that Angie was not a tomboy, noting, quote, "She always wore dresses. She had long blonde hair that I often styled into French braids, pigtails, or buns," end quote. She had a deep love for animals and considered becoming a veterinarian when she grew older. Her pets included a variety of cherished guinea pigs and rabbits. She had worked at Kentucky Fried Chicken, and she used her earnings to pay for the medical care for a sick bunny. But when the bunny passed, she was simply brokenhearted. Oh, what a sweetie. Linda said, quote, "I would have preferred Angie to stay closer to home, but I guess all mothers are like that. You couldn't hold Angie back, though. She was a force. One of the things her father said about her was that she changed the nature of a room when she entered it. And it's true, you know, she really did. She was like a light going on, so funny and witty. That's what I'll miss, that light," end quote. And I have links to this story on my blog as well. In Joe Krakowicki's interview, he told the police that Angela mentioned that she was going for a ride while Star Trek was on television. As he stayed home and made her birthday cake, he was looking forward to watching In Living Color at 8 p.m., which was a ritual of theirs they watched every week. Now remember, in 1992, there was no streaming and no DVR, so you either watched it live or you missed it. When the show started and Angela still hadn't returned, he felt something was totally wrong. And tragically, Angela Brosso, aged 22, had her life cut short just as it was beginning. 2 days later, a few miles from the crime scene, a report came into police. A retired man doing his daily walk had turned down a side road, noting some graffiti that had been drawn on a plywood board in red lipstick. Quote, "I chopped that bitch's head off," end quote. The lipstick had been dropped at the scene, and this retired man, he had not seen this on his walk the day before. 10 days later, a transient fisherman named Mark Quayles rushed into the Bismarck, pleading for police help as he'd seen something horrifying. Authorities would find Angela's head caught in a canal grate just west of Interstate 17. Investigator Leo Speliopoulos spoke with Quayles, who denied any involvement in this, a claim that was later confirmed. A forensic pathologist would reveal that the head showed minimum decomposition, indicating it had likely been refrigerated or frozen by the killer, and the investigation ensued. 10 months later, on September 22, 1993, around 9 a.m., a jogger was running along the bike path and noted some blood drops, and then saw the body of a young girl floating face up in the canal. Notifying the authorities, the police arrived quickly, as did the dive team. A Caucasian female was removed from the water and was wearing an extremely tight turquoise one-piece swimsuit that zipped up the front, clearly intended for a younger child. Breasts exposed, the letters WSC were carved into her chest and a cross below them. Like Angela, she wore her shoes and socks. Blood drops on the bike path ran for approximately 50 feet or 15 meters, ending at a large pool of dried blood, indicating that the victim had lain on that spot for some length of time. Drag marks led to the landscaping, and in the flora, a bloody sleeve that belonged to the victim was found, along with wires from her headphones. Drag marks continued down the bike path, and then approximately 100 feet or 30 meters past the entrance to the tunnel, which ran under the freeway for pedestrian use. The victim was then dragged and placed in the canal. Her sports bra was found cut to shreds on the side of the highway. In a credit union parking lot dumpster adjacent to the crime scene, more of the victim's belongings were found, and she was identified as 17-year-old Melanie Bernas. Melanie Beth Bernas was a junior at Arcadia High School. Melanie maintained terrific grades while working part-time at a yogurt shop. Her father, Michael Bernas, referred to her as, quote, one of the 6 miracles of my life, end quote, alongside their mother, Marlene, and Melanie's siblings, Jill, Chrissy, Michael, and Brian. Pastor Larry Finch mentioned that Melanie often encouraged others not to hold on to bitterness, but to let it go. Described as the girl next door, Melanie loved basketball and dreamed of becoming a doctor. Her childhood friend, Daphne Marcus, fondly remembers their time together, swimming, jumping on a trampoline, and having sleepovers. Melanie's mother, Marlene, last saw her daughter at 7 p.m. on September 21, 1993, when she went out for dinner. Returning home around 9:30 p.m., Melanie was not there, and her bicycle was also missing. Now, it was not uncommon for Melanie to go for a ride, but never at night. When she did not return, Marlene called the police around 2 a.m. to report her daughter missing. By 10 a.m., the official report was filed. Meanwhile, Charlotte Pottle and her sister were riding their bikes along the Interstate 17 underpass near Castles and Coasters, an amusement park. As Charlotte rode through a large puddle, something struck her. That wasn't right. Was that blood? Stopping to investigate, she discovered that it was indeed blood. Noting drag marks, Charlotte Pottle said she had a horrible feeling, as reported by the Arizona Republic. Melanie's body was discovered shortly afterwards in the canal. Later, Melanie's sister Jill would say that her sister was, quote, the baby of our family, a typical, inquisitive, energetic, outspoken teenager with high hopes and big dreams for a future that she was just starting to pursue, end quote. Smart, caring, a girl with strong opinions, it was Melanie who stood up against bullies, even if she was pushed around because of it. And Jill knew Melanie to be, quote, a cool little sister and a true friend, end quote. This news had a profound impact on her family, friends, and particularly the staff and students of Arcadia High School, as teachers struggled to maintain their composure while announcing the tragic death of Melanie, described as, quote, an excellent student and a wonderful young woman, end quote. In an assignment, Melanie had recently identified her goals: maintaining her 3.8 GPA, spending more time with her family, and riding her green 21-speed hard rock sport mountain bike more often. Her bike, like Angela Brosso's, went missing, leading the Arizona Republic to report on the similarities between these two cases. The police, however, denied any connection between the murders to avoid causing panic. But the similarities were obvious. Young, athletic women riding bikes along the canal, the same geographic area, brutal stabbing to the back, blood drops on the bike path, mutilation, missing bikes and Walkman. But differences did exist. For example, only one of them was beheaded. Well, the police wouldn't connect the cases until they knew for sure, and that happened in March 1994. The crime lab linked the cases to a single perpetrator. The same man had killed Angela and Melanie, and his DNA profile matched no one in CODIS, as the case went cold. Enter Troy A. Hillman, certified public accountant turned detective. Graduating from the police academy, he began patrolling the streets of South Phoenix and then moved into investigating financial crimes, which makes perfect sense for a CPA. He'd eventually be promoted to patrol sergeant and squad leader. This man was truly following his calling. Now, the original detective investigating the Canal murders retired in 1997, at a time when Phoenix was growing as was the murder rate. Swamped with new cases, homicide detectives had little time to delve into the cold ones. By the time cold case detectives came to be in the mid-2000s, there were literally thousands of cases to review. With no hits in the DNA database, many assumed that the Canal killer was dead, or at very least was causing destruction in other parts of the country. Troy Hillman's obsession with the case began when he received a media public information request, which involved endless hours of redacting to ensure that sensitive information was not released, which might jeopardize a trial in the future. Reading the reams and reams of paper, knowing that a serial killer was out there, made his heart ache. The acts committed on these young women were beyond savage, Troy writes. Delving into the case files, Troy saw that Angela's boyfriend, who I've mentioned, Joe Krakowicki, lived with her and was the last person to see Angela alive, and thus became the prime suspect. He had said they had a good relationship with small quarrels like everyone else. That day, they'd slept late, as the night before, Angela had returned home very late from a conference in Los Angeles. Picking up her bike from the shop, Angela and Joe ate at TGIF and then went grocery shopping, which is always better to do when you're not hungry, right? Getting home around 7 p.m., Angela set off on a bike ride. Now, investigators did dig into Joe. Linda, Angela's mother, had said he hadn't seemed worried when he spoke about Angela being missing, and he told her they had been fighting over the last few weeks. It turns out Angela was considering moving back to Pennsylvania, but she needed to save up for the move. She felt Joe wasn't as supportive of her career as he might be, and he continued to drink and party often. Some of Angela's co-workers confirmed some of this, but investigators could not connect Joe to Melanie Bernas, and ultimately, DNA ruled out Joe as the killer. Troy was assembling a corkboard with photos, connections, and tips, and now he added Melanie's photo to it. Her mother was the last person to see her alive, leaving her home with the doors and windows locked. Melanie's close friend said that she did not have a boyfriend, and she abstained from drugs, although she drank occasionally. He learned that her best friend had been over the night Melanie went missing, around 8:00 p.m. Now Troy doubled back and looked into Mark Quayles, the man who had discovered Angela's head. Known as the Fisher King, Quayles was found at a local bar. Interviewed, Quayles said he had been fishing all night until dawn and he had seen no head. Later in the morning, walking along the canal, is when he had spotted it. Troy also revisited the doctor's assessment that the head had been kept in cold storage for the 10 days it was missing, which is simply dreadful. He noted the cryptic message written on the plywood, recording the geographic locations of these 4 critical points to each other: the bodies, the head, the lipstick message. He reviewed all the 35mm photographs of the crime scene and the autopsy, including those taken in the pedestrian tunnel. Bleary-eyed, the clock ticked to 1 a.m. as he was wrapping up. After coffee and breakfast the next morning, Troy began assessing the similarities. Both had clothing torn, cut, and removed, except for shoes and socks, so no foot fetish in this case. Both rode bikes on the bike path by the canal after dusk. Both bikes and victims' Walkmans with headsets disappeared. Tunnels existed on both sides of the murder scenes. The fatal wound had been a violent stab to their upper back, which immediately collapsed their lungs and penetrated their hearts. It was a fatal wound. Now he explored the dissimilarities. One victim was beheaded, one was not. Post-mortem, letters were carved into one, then a cross was carved into the torso, and there was the possible attempt to cut one of them in half. Another instrument was used, carving up her pelvic area. This heavy mutilation was not replicated in the latter case. There was a slight incision around her neck and on her chest where a cross with 3 dots had been carved. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit? And the letters WSC. Angela was displayed on a berm, naked except for the shoes and socks. Melanie was redressed into the small turquoise bodysuit, dragged and dumped into the canal. And significant graffiti was written in a nearby tunnel, which was absent in Angela's case. Next, Troy determined what had been done in the previous investigation and what had not, and all the tips that had come in needed to be reassessed. What Troy needed was a diverse team to help him manage the overwhelming amount of information in this case. Well, he knew that DNA had transformed crime fighting, and he believed it would be essential for solving this case. He took his peanut butter and jelly sandwich with him to attend a talk by Kelly Merwin, a DNA expert. Now, most police officers had not studied chemistry since high school, but Kelly Merwin explained the concepts clearly in under an hour. And as one of the original Canal murder investigators, Kelly knew every detail of the case and would be Troy's first new recruit for his team because he needed help. William Shera, a sharp and seasoned homicide investigator, plagued by a bad back, he was a type of guy who never complained and never stopped working a case. Known for his pleasant demeanor, this guy knew everyone. Working a case, he was heading into the lab for DNA analysis when Troy caught up with him, and Troy asked him to join the cold case team he was assembling, with William quickly accepting. He, too, had been part of the original search team after both of the murders. High energy and optimistic, Marianne Ramirez was busy in her cubicle speaking rapidly in Spanish, reassuring a parent as Troy approached. As part of the International Criminal Apprehension Team, Marianne focused on suspects who had fled to Mexico and was an expert in conducting forensic interviews with children. When asked about helping with the Canal murder case, Marianne eagerly accepted, and she and William would work together to determine which suspect DNA had been collected, and, if not, travel to gather any that had not been. Troy now approached Mark Armistead, whose cubicle workspace was filled with piles and piles of handwritten and typed pages, using a style known as organized chaos. I'm familiar with that style. Troy tested Mark by asking him about a specific topic, and Mark quickly retrieved the information, showcasing his unorthodox filing system. After some discussion, Mark joined Troy, Kelly, William, and Marianne to work on the Canal murders. Clark Schwarzkopf, a passionate and laser-focused detective whose approach was centered on doing the right thing and getting the bad guys. He had recently solved a complex case involving Dale Hausner and Samuel Dateman, a duo of serial killers. And insider information, there is a book on the Hausner and Dateman murders that I'm currently reading. And Clark, he enthusiastically agreed to join the Canal murder investigation team. Known as the Kid for his charming boyish demeanor, J.J. Alberta was renowned for closing cases and handling tasks with professionalism. He was in middle school when the Canal murders occurred, so J.J. was eager to seek justice for Angela and Melanie. News of J.J.'s involvement with the team spread quickly, and now Dominic Rostenberg burst into Troy's office declaring, "I want in too." Having arrested a lot of robbery suspects in the past, Troy knew Dom's superpower was extracting confessions. He had planned to ask Dom, but he just hadn't had the chance yet. And Troy told him, quote, "You're used to robbery suspects. You gonna step up your game?" And the Dominator accepted the challenge. The team was finally assembled for the hunt. A phenomenal and talented group of people, he thought. But can we outwit a monster who's been hiding for decades? End quote. Weeks later, detectives traveled to Los Angeles to interview attendees who had been at Angela's training session and DeVry Associates. Reviewing and adding the information to the corkboard, Troy shook his head saying, quote, "It looks like a mathematician who's gone insane trying to prove a hellacious theory," end quote. Yet he tirelessly searched through the massive files, seeking the elusive clue that could break the case. One who valued collaboration, Troy encouraged the team to review the FBI profiles, as different perspectives could reveal important details. There were 2 FBI profiles, one for Angela's murder, dated February 1993, and another for Melanie's case, written that December. William presented Angela's profile to the team, while Marion presented Melanie's killer's profile. Victimology. William said the victim was 22 years old the day her body was discovered. She lived with a male partner and had informed him and a friend that she was going riding. The friend revealed that Angela was concerned about telling Joe Krakowicki that she wanted to move out, though she did not fear a physical confrontation. She was employed and was making good progress in her career. She did not drink or use drugs and was described by friends as friendly but somewhat naive. Socially, her life revolved around her boyfriend and a close circle of friends. According to the FBI, her lifestyle was considered to be at low risk for violent crimes. However, her bike rides increased her risk to a, quote, situationally higher risk level, end quote. The medical examiner's report. The FBI identified, quote, the significance of the wounds rather than rehashing what the ME had observed, end quote. Stab wound number 1 was in the back, quote, fracturing the 10th rib, puncturing the left lung, and penetrating the descending aorta, end quote. This was consistent with Angela riding her bike and a blitz attack occurring, this wound fatal. Another superficial wound appears on her back near her buttocks. She suffered from abrasions to her left leg and thigh area, lower back, and buttocks, which was consistent with being dragged by the perpetrator from the bike to where she was found. Here, the killer cut off her clothing, stabbed, and cut the victim, finally beheading her. He was acting out his violent fantasy at this point. The profile concluded that the killer had used a, quote, large-shaped cutting instrument and has considerable strength, end quote. So I realized he would not only attacked and then dragged Angela, he also had to have removed her bike from the path so that wouldn't be suspicious seeing a bike all by itself laying on the path, to allay any suspicions that something was happening. I don't think he just left the bike laying in plain sight, went off, did what he did, and then went back and got it. All right, crime assessment. Delving into the killer's violent fantasies provoked, quote, an erotic satisfaction and pleasure, end quote, hedonist lust killer type. This disorganized crime targeted a victim of opportunity. An uncontrollable urge came upon the killer, and he lay in wait for a victim to come down the bike path, ambushing Angela from behind. She was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. She may have tried to escape, but that first stabbing was fatal. Significantly, the brutality of this attack far exceeded what homicide detectives had seen before, end quote. Dragged where she was found, the unsub then cut off her clothes, and he made 2, quote, incisive cuts across the top of her chest and then down the center to her genital area, end quote. 2 stab wounds were noted on either side of the larger central cut, and this likely held some symbolic importance to the killer. There is also a transected incision, that is a cut that runs east to west, around the body as if trying to cut the victim in half. Exploratory wounds, designed to satisfy the sexual needs needed to mutilate, suggested that he wanted to remove skin or expose organs. Angela was sexually assaulted and semen was present, which may have been masturbatory rather than coitus. The profile says that the killer either removed body parts to delay identification or for personal reasons. The hands and feet were not removed, so this was more likely driven by personal desires fueled by his fantasy. And this was terribly important to the killer because this kind of mutilation takes time during which he risked discovery, and he certainly would have been covered in blood. Decapitating the victim, he took the head. He had probably walked to the site and took Angela's bike to ride away, head under his arm or placed in a backpack of sorts. Based on the research, the perpetrator was a white male. Age is always difficult to ascertain, but this kind of criminal behavior manifests in the late 20s to late 30s. A loner, he was somewhat eccentric, dressed sloppily, and was a stranger to Angela. He lacks interpersonal skills, has few close friends if any, and chooses to associate with people older or younger than himself. He also lives alone with a parental figure. He would be familiar with the bike paths, canals, and tunnels of the area. He often walks around at night, and if he had a car, it would be older and not well maintained. He likely took jewelry or clothing as a souvenir, which would allow him to relive the fantasy later. This type of violent crime would be triggered by a significant stressor. There was likely some mental illness at play, and he had counseling or institutionalization in his past. Post-offense behavior. The head would have been taken to a place where the unsub felt secure, safe, and would not be interrupted. He would be bloody, and he would need to change his clothes and clean up and decompress. Disposing of the body parts, he would enjoy the shock the community would experience. But only the killer could explain the canal and if he was sending a message. He would definitely be following the media accounts of the murder and follow the progression of the investigation in the case. As the team fell silent, because this was a lot of information to comprehend.
Oof.
Mary Ann presented next. The FBI agent who had written the Melanie Bernas case profile did take into consideration Angela's murder. Victimology. Melanie was 17, attending high school, and was a good student who occasionally drank alcohol. Homesick that day, her mother went out to dinner, and 2.5 hours later, on returning, she realized Melanie wasn't home and her bike was missing. She was considered at low risk for violent crime. However, she'd gone riding at dark in an area where another woman had been killed. So like Angela, this put her at a situationally higher risk level. The ME's report. The initial stab wound to Melanie was identical to that of Angela's in location, dimension, and equally fatal. She was dragged from where she collapsed to a nearby location, concealing the killer and victim from public view. All the cuttings on both victims was inflicted post-mortem. Melanie was mutilated, with the killer engaging in sexual activity, leaving semen. An incision ran all around her neck, indicating that he had toyed with decapitating her. With care, he lightly carved the letters WSC between and slightly above her breasts. Then she was redressed in the much too small bodysuit, part of the violent sexual fantasy of the killer. Again, he spent a significant amount of time at this crime scene. Crime scene analysis. In both cases, the bike path was well lit and near a busy highway. Melanie was a victim of opportunity, and both victims were chosen because they rode bikes. Now, this is a risky choice. Selecting a victim on foot would be much easier and safer. Thus, the bikes likely play into the fantasy. In both cases, a single vicious blitz stabbing to the back was inflicted, and then dragged Melanie to a private spot off the path. There is divergence, as the mutilation of Angela was far more extensive than that of Melanie. This turquoise bodysuit was an essential part of his fantasy, indicating some premeditation. The WSC, the cross and neck incisions, were methodical and thus ritualistic behavior. Now, it's likely that the canal water indicates some association for the killer, significant in both cases. The killer risked discovery by throwing the victim's head into the canal. There are many more safer methods which he could have chose to discard it. Melanie's body was dragged from concealment in the bush to the canal, again engaging in high-risk behavior. Could this have been an effort to wash away evidence? The FBI didn't think so. Instead, this was part of his fantasy. The killer is described as, quote, impulsive with an intense obsession for fulfilling his fantasy. end quote, and he took the bicycles and Walkman as souvenirs. Offender characteristics and traits. He was familiar with both crime scene areas. He has been there often and feels comfortable. Others have likely seen him there. He was likely a mental health inpatient. With these 2 successful murders, his fantasies would have become more elaborate, and he may have been institutionalized or jailed after Melanie's attack, given there were no other similar cases. He would have a collection of violent pornography, including detective-type magazines. The knives used in the killings would be important to him, and they are still in his possession. Whoa, again, there's a lot to digest for the detectives and for us. Now carrying crime scene photos, Troy walked along the bike path and canal, retracing Melanie's route. Had the killer done the same thing and recently walked along there, reliving his wretched fantasies? Troy asked himself. As he thought about this, a biker approached Troy and shouted, quote, "On your left," end quote, with Troy moving right. Had Melanie pedaled towards the killer, shouted a warning, only he didn't move. Was that why she stopped? She had had some scuff marks on the back of her legs, so he wondered she'd crashed her bike trying to avoid the killer. Had the killer pulled a Ted Bundy, pleading for help to get her to stop and get off her bike? Troy came to the spot where the killer had raped and redressed her, his stomach souring. How had he carried her all this way? Why had no one seen this? Walking from the canal towards the bike path and tunnel, Troy turned left. The tunnel allowed pedestrians and bikers to cross under the highway safely, and the fluorescent lights hummed. Pulling out the tunnel photographs, not much had changed since 1993. Graffiti marred the walls to the north, reading Mini Park, Gumby, and La Raza, written in black. On the south side, red lettering, WSC, KAW, Blitz, Little Devil, Tweety, the T looking more like the Greek letter tau. This graffiti was a trophy, still there after all these years. Did the killer walk by, gloating inside and fantasizing? The drawn W in the tunnel matched the W in the WSC, which was carved on the body. In Tweety, the Y had a unique circle at the bottom. Next to the Tweety was a cartooned character of a man wearing a fedora and eyeglasses. It could be a detective. Troy took notes on his observations, mind spinning. And he was off duty tonight. He knew his wife would be concerned, no matter how supportive she might be. He moved quickly now through the west tunnel, emerging where the killer had thrown Angela's head into the canal. It was bone-chilling, and no Hollywood movie could have been creepier. Why had he taken Angela's head, only to throw it in the canal 10 days later? Where had it been during that time? Why had he dragged Melanie into the canal, risking exposure? Why did he redress her in the too small girl's bodysuit? Why was he fascinated with water? So many whys. Exhausted, Troy stopped at the park next to Angela's apartment complex, which also looked the same as it had back in the 90s. A couple had called in, reporting that they had seen her biking towards the canal. Troy noted as he retraced her path that the area was deserted. He reached a spot where she was found, where the attack likely happened, and all he could envision was all the blood. His head ached, and he knew he had to take a break. Back in his truck, he wrote down more questions. Why had he left their shoes and socks on? Why had he cut their clothing with a knife? What did the cuts mean? What did WSC mean? Why the cross with 3 dots? Was it some religious message or symbolism? What was with Tweety? What was this monster trying to say? The next day, William gave Troy a stack of Tweety and Little Devil nicknames from their database. Although he found some names linked to various gangs, no one expected to find a killer named Tweety. But still, they knew they had to check every lead, and it was more likely that Tweety meant something to the killer. But what? So many unreadable clues. In 1993, the original detectives suspected that the killer was trying to mislead them with the abbreviation WSC, which could be a reference to a local gang, West Side City. However, their investigation found no connections. Now Troy explored the religious significance of the cross and 3 dots, and considered the possibilities such as the Holy Trinity and the WSC, Westminster Shorter Catechism, a catechism designed to educate Presbyterians in their faith. He contacted a minister who specialized in the catechism, but the minister was offended that Troy was trying to tie a murder to the catechism and hung up. Seriously, pal? Come on now. Troy's team would tease him about this incident, though. Now, Troy then sought insight from a local university professor, but nothing useful was forthcoming. Now, some of the best clues about who had murdered 2 young women, unfortunately, came from their bodies. Troy spoke with a medical legal death investigator who was also an expert on religion and symbolism. Perhaps he could unravel the mysterious clues left by the killer. This expert concluded that the killer must have some working understanding of anatomy. The initial stabbings were precise, doing fatal damage with a single blow. Troy wanted to know if he was a doctor or a medical professional. The death investigator was skeptical, though. The perpetrator was just knowledgeable. He also suggested that the WSC carving and dots might be related to the Westminster Shorter Catechism, thus validating that Troy's thinking was right, with Marion and William nudging him. Troy mentioned that Melanie was submerged in water and Angela beheaded. Both could allude to some religious something. Now, the number 93 was also sprayed on the tunnel wall, and the death investigator said that the 93rd question of the catechism references baptism and the Lord's Supper, and detectives were astonished. They had assumed the 93 was the year that he killed her. The death investigator now added that the cross on the second victim could allude to sulfur, which was a symbol for transformation or possibly rebirth, making something beautiful from something ugly. Well, if that was the case, they had to consider Silence of the Lambs, which was published in 1988 and then released as a film in 1991. That fictional serial killer was seeking transformation. Heading home with all this spinning around in his head, William considered what they'd learned, possibly connecting the killer with the catechism, baptism, water and sulfur, and a movie buff who liked The Silence of the Lambs. But could this help catch the guy? The team wondered. After giving his lieutenant, Joe Knott, a well-respected and seasoned veteran, the update, they mused on the difficulties in solving the Canal murders and adapting the 1993 technology to modern tech. The hundreds of crime scene photos were jumbled, and locating microfiche in the archives was time-consuming. Not to mention, they still had 2,500 other cold cases. An excellent listener, Lieutenant Knott, pointed out that most of those in homicide thought the guy was dead, and all of this was a waste of time. But Troy was adamant that was way too easy. They owed their families answers, perpetrator dead or alive. And Lieutenant Knott remained confident if anyone could figure this out, it was Troy and his team. Calling the team together, Troy told them that they were Angela and Melanie's last hope. This guy had pulled off 2 murders in a very precise manner. Now, Marianne was a former Navy officer and thought that he might have some advanced tactical training. William agreed. Those first wounds were delivered in a way to ensure immediate incapacitation both times. Who was taught that? Well, the military did, especially in special units like Navy SEALs, Green Berets, or Rangers. He also had to be pretty strong to decapitate. Were they looking for a Rambo? Both women were athletic, and they would go down fighting. But J.J. and Clark were not convinced, however. This type of precision can be learned by reading up albeit reading about and actually executing a blow can be quite different. No pun intended. They also considered that Luke Air Force Base was 20 to 25 miles or 32 to 40 kilometers from where these women were killed. JJ had a buddy in the Air Force, and he said he would reach out to him. Marianne also had some NCIS connections that she would check with. They would now go through the files, mindful that a military connection might be in play. Then Mark took Troy to the basement, a huge room with large fluorescent lights that had closets along the interior wall. The furniture was vintage 1980s, and flipping on the lights, nothing scattered into the shadows. Oh, thank God. Before him were hundreds and hundreds of banker boxes, all containing information on the Canal murders. Many old filing cabinets were also stuffed with reports and documents. And Mark pointed out that these weren't all of them. The good news was that they were more organized than expected. A comprehensive database had been compiled over 20 years ago, with contributions from citizens, agencies, etc. There was a hope that this data could be moved to an Excel sheet sooner than later. And JJ and Troy got into it. They dove into the files and began collecting names of potential leads, which would eventually number over 1,000. Now Troy and Mark split the list, beginning with A, beginning with Z, and working towards meeting in the middle. While detectives 20 years ago had done the early workups on the information, they had not collected DNA from all the male potential leads. That would now be remedied, prioritizing the most interesting on the creepy Canal list. Looking into the files, some tips were downright bizarre, from drunk men saying that they couldn't have been that fucked up the night of the killings, or a call from a woman who had dreamed about a spirit whispering, "tattoo," surrounded by a bunch of black dahlias. See, I wasn't the only one who thought of the Black Dahlia case. But sadly, there was no shortage of creepy men out there. Mark now revisited the Fisher King, Mark Quayles, who had reported finding Angela's head. When interviewed back in 1992, he had been drunk, and the original investigators found him to be incapable of that kind of violence. Blood had been taken, but had he actually been ruled out by DNA? Quayles knew the area well, and he went low-key after inserting himself into the investigation. But after conferring with Kelly, she confirmed that yes, Mark Quayles, the Fisher King, had been ruled out. Strike one. Just keep going. Supplement 63 of the original reports bothered Troy. A couple had lived in Angela's apartment complex and went for a walk to the Circle K somewhere between midnight and 1 a.m. They passed someone acting suspicious, nervously glancing behind him as he walked, and he appeared to be holding something with both hands under his jacket. He was male, white, about 5'10" or 1.7 meters, 35 years old, dark blondish hair, beige pants, white shirt, dark beige jacket with big brown framed glasses and loafers. A very detailed description. Did these glasses have any connection to the character graffitied on the tunnel wall? What was this guy carrying? Could it have been Angela's head? Supplement 82 followed. Another couple from the apartment complex had taken their dog out around 6:45 p.m. Around 7 o'clock, they saw a white woman riding her mountain bike towards them at a quick pace, and they thought it was Angela. After avoiding hitting their dog, she headed west on the north side of Cactus Road. Around 20 minutes later, they saw a man approaching the church on West Cactus, trying the church doors, which were locked. He was carrying something, but they couldn't see what. Was it a head? Once he saw the couple, he moved to the other side of the church, looking over his shoulder. The church had been dark, with no cars in the lot, and he was in his 30s to early 40s, a white man, 5'8" or 1.7 meters, shortish blonde hair, a white or cream shirt, tattered sweater, and carrying something. While comparing the descriptions from these supplements, Troy noted the overlap. Had he hidden the head in the church? Was this just a coincidence Troy pondered as he pulled into the church parking lot. Knocking, Troy identified himself as a detective with the Phoenix Police Department. Roger, the deacon, had volunteered at the church since the 1980s, and he recalled the murders of Angela and Melanie. When he was asked about a janitor or a caretaker, Roger said they never had one. He did not recognize the suspect's description, mentioning that transients occasionally came and went. Regarding other deacons or pastors, Roger couldn't recall the deacons, but he offered to provide the names of the previous pastors. He noted that one had retired after the murders and now lives in Sun City. Troy checked on the information Roger had given him and found the retired pastor, who would have been in his 50s at the time of the murders. His record was clean, and he did not match either couple's descriptions. An associate pastor had started at the church in April 1992, while Angela was killed just 7 months later. Roger had claimed that this pastor left under shady circumstances related to financial issues. While reviewing old church directories, Troy noted that 3 men matched the descriptions, including one who looked particularly creepy. While arriving at the associate pastor's home, Troy heard 2 loud male voices. After ringing the doorbell, a young man in his 20s answered, looking a little scattered, while the associate pastor was kind of hiding behind a pillar. Troy explained his visit, and the pastor recalled the body found in the canal, but did not remember the murder of Angela, which had happened closer to his church. Troy handed him some photos to look at and had him seal them in an envelope afterwards. He was now armed with the associate pastor's DNA, and he had Kelly process it. A few weeks would pass, with Kelly informing Troy that the associate pastor was in the clear. There was no DNA match. Keep going. Troy followed up with the 3 individuals from the church directory. 2 had clean records, but 1 had a few minor legal issues. When he visited this one, Troy explained he was investigating cold cases. The man denied being a deacon or having a key to the church. Troy showed him photos and asked him to put them in the envelope and seal it, once again collecting a DNA sample. Weeks later, Kelly reported that this man had been ruled out as a suspect. Keep going. Troy saw that Angela had been a faculty assistant to Professor Herbert Brooks at DeVry in Los Angeles. Right before her murder, she had visited him at his trailer outside the city during her business trip. Although Brooks denied any romantic interest in her in 1992, he also described her as, quote, a 21-year-old virgin, end quote, and had advised Angela to break up with her boyfriend before giving her a lingering hug. Now, Marianne found these statements odd, and an anonymous caller had noted that Professor Brooks became upset whenever Angela's murder was mentioned, making him a potential lead, although no connection to Melanie could be established. Now, Professor Brooks was living with his elderly father in a rundown shack in Maryland. Bringing the county sheriff with her to question Brooks, Marianne saw that he was visibly unhinged on seeing the officers, shaking and stuttering. He declared that his relationship with Angela was platonic, and Marianne obtained his DNA sample, heading back to Phoenix. She told Troy she was enthusiastic about the professor. There were a lot of red flags: the lingering hug, the virgin comment, and his extremely nervous demeanor. Filling in William, he bet a case of Diet Cokes that it was the professor, with Troy chiding him for drinking that crap. Drink water in the desert, man. More weeks rolled by, and the call came from Kelly. Professor Herbert Brooks was ruled out. Disappointed, they all took it in stride, and Marianne, a devout Christian, told Troy, quote, I have faith. On to the next one, boss. We'll find our killer, end quote. Keep going. With the local authorities, Marianne now knocked on a trailer door in West Virginia. A rough-looking man answered, with a clear dislike for law enforcement in his eyes. Roy Lyons was not under arrest, but they did have a court order to take his DNA. They had found the name Roy Lyons in the files. An anonymous tip was called in right after Angela's murder that Roy Lyons had tried to sell a bike at the Circle K where he was a clerk. Then the tipper called back, claiming Lyons had buried a head in the field across from the apartment complex. The original investigators had tracked him down, but Roy refused to speak to them. Put under surveillance, they saw him doing nothing of importance. After Melanie's murder, a tip came in that a Circle K clerk told a boy he had a bike to sell. Now, the original detectives believed that this was also Lyons. He had an extensive rap sheet with an obvious pattern of sexual deviance and violence towards women, substance abuse, and possibly a mental disorder or two. And military. He had been in Vietnam while in the Army. So there were a lot of red flags with this guy. Lyons denied knowing Angela or Melanie to Marianne, but he failed a polygraph, and he seemed like a real possibility. Dom went and told Troy that Marianne thought Lyons was the guy, as her head popped over the cubicle, and she corrected Dom, quote, "I said he looks good," end quote. Laughing, Troy agreed, and Lyons was mentioned in files on both murders too. Quote, Marianne just wants to show us all up, end quote, teased the Dominator, with everyone enjoying the banter. Again, with hopes high, they waited for the DNA results. When Kelly called a few weeks later, Troy sat upright, hoping for good news. That did not come. Lyons was no match. William drank down another Coke, and Marianne vowed to continue having faith, and Troy noted, another strikeout. Just keep going. Notes from the files. Shortly after Angela's murder, a man named Thomas Kaiser told the officers that he had gone out searching for her head and her bike. Wait, what? Thomas Kaiser went out looking for her head. Well, he also reported finding a knife under a tree near the TGIF where Joe and Angela had eaten the Sunday before her death, which was in close proximity to the location where her head was found. Clark, who had experience taking down serial killers, felt the need to rule Kaiser out as a suspect. In the 1990s, the lab had analyzed this knife and found no blood or fingerprints on the handle, blade, or sheath. Kaiser still lived in the Phoenix area, and he volunteered to provide his DNA. And once again, the team was walking around on eggshells waiting for lab results. Weeks passed, and Kelly finally called with the results. Kaiser was ruled out. Troy jokingly threatened to nickname her the lead killer. Laughing, Kelly insisted that they collect more samples. They all were determined to find this guy. But when JJ heard the news that Kaiser was ruled out, he feigned relief that it wasn't Kaiser. His kid had a basketball game that night, and he didn't have time for a major arrest. Well, the next day, when Clark learned that Kaiser was ruled out, he cussed for a solid 5 minutes. The frustration was palatable, and the desire to catch this guy was becoming increasingly difficult to bear. Dom now visited Troy with a new lead. The FBI had flagged John Tobias, a medical scientist with an outstanding arrest warrant from France for the mutilation of a young girl, which could potentially link him to the Canal killings. He had not been ruled out back in the day, and the Dominator was on this. Later, he returned to Troy's office with the news that the local police had visited Tobias's home, and after requesting a DNA sample, Tobias had complied. Quote, "You think he's our guy?" Troy asked. "He mutilated a French girl, right? Get ready to put my face all over the news, Sergeant Hillman. I'm going to blow this thing wide open." End quote. Troy smiled at Dom's optimism. Despite his bravado, Dom wasn't seeking glory. He was heartbroken over what Angela and Melanie had suffered. He used humor as a coping device. When Kelly called to say Tobias was out, Troy threatened to stop taking her calls. Heading in, he shared the news with Dom, and dejected, Dom mimicked a mic drop and started walking off stage. Troy encouraged him to stay positive, but it was clear that managing disappointment was proving difficult. With his wife carrying out with her nursing girlfriends for some much-needed stress relief, Troy was home scanning the internet for possibly related cases. Then a pang of fear. What if this guy wasn't in their files? Was he wasting time going through these thousands upon thousands of pages? Well, digging for similar cases, Troy found some. 1. Diana Vicari, 19 years old, from Tucson, Arizona. On October 22, 1992, she had attended a heavy metal concert. Her arms were later discovered in a dumpster, and the rest of her was never found. Tucson PD had arrested Lemure Pryon for her murder in 1997. Pryon had bragged about taking a woman into the desert, sexually assaulting her, killing her, and cutting her up. In late 1992, he had kidnapped a girl, taken her to a secluded place, and threatened her with a knife. She was traumatized, but survived. Convicted in 1999, the courts overturned the Pryon case in 2003 because prosecutors had failed to show evidence that there was another suspect, John Mazur. Jennifer Pentilla, a cold case from New Mexico. Last heard from in October 1991, she was biking across the western United States from San Diego. Her Bible, tent, clothing, and other items were found under a bush. Her bike was never found, just like Angela and Melanie's. So did this guy have a bike fetish or what? And Jennifer had taken a bus from Phoenix to Tucson. Number 3, Claire Hogue from San Diego. In 1994, the 14-year-old's throat was cut and her left breast cut off at Torrey Pines State Beach near the water. A lab technician named Kevin Charles Brown was arrested, and he matched the descriptions in their files given by witnesses. He had used a stun gun and put sand in Claire's mouth. Could their team get a sample and compare his DNA? And another, El Dorado, the Sutter decapitation murders. Veronica Martinez was 19 when she went missing on January 27, 1992. 2 months later, she was found in a gully, decapitated. Similar age, time frame, decapitated like Angela. Another woman was found buried in Sutter County, again decapitated and with no hands. Same time frame, same age, and mutilated. All certainly had differences, but there were definite similarities. After finding a dozen or more murder cases, some unsolved, some involving bikes, mutilation, decapitation, and water bodies, Troy was about to fall over from exhaustion. Quote, "I felt lost in maggot land. There had to be a connection. Our killer had to have moved on from Phoenix after and been somewhere before. We just weren't seeing it." End quote. And all of this research was dreadfully disturbing. Using his accounting skills, Troy, the ex-CPA, created a huge spreadsheet on the possibly related murders, timeline, victimology, all the details, and it would prove to be an invaluable tool for years to come. But could these cold cases be solved before the team was old and gray? And there is where I will pause part 1 on Troy A. Hillman's book, Chasing Down the Zombie Hunter. Look, just go buy the book and read it with me. There is so much more coming in our next episode, part 2, episode 148, Pathology Trumps Intellect. And that episode title should provide a glimmer. Thank you for listening. I see you as you hear me. Again, I want to wish you a wonderful holiday season. We are almost to New Year's 2026, and 2026 is going to be an amazing year. I will be on Creators Row at CRIMECON 2026 in Las Vegas, May 29th to May 31st. If you plan to buy your CRIMECON badge, let me save you 10%. Use my code MurderShelf. All lowercase letters, one word. Hey, every penny counts. Save 10%. And start getting your Murder Shelf Book Club merch now. Again, the link is on my blog. If you enjoy the podcast, could you share it with your family and friends? And please leave a positive 5-star review, especially on Apple Podcasts. Additionally, you can join my Patreon for $2 to $4 a month and help choose the next book I feature. And I'm teaching my serial killer class. All of my sources, articles, a ton of photographs, plus my baked brie and cranberry bites recipe and wine are linked on my blog at www.murdershelfbookclub.com, December 2025. If you have any questions or comments, contact me at jill@murdershelfbookclub.com or follow me on X, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I cannot wait for part 2 on chasing down the zombie hunter. And I have some special episodes and interviews about the most amazing true crime books coming. Trust your gut and lock your doors and windows, murder bookies. You can find the complete recipe on my blog. Now, in Joe Krakowicki's written and produced by Jill, all rights reserved. Music, The Pewter Elephant by Blue Dot Sessions.